Welcome, good evening. Welcome to this special evening and one of the highlights of this 19th edition of the International Film Festival and Forum on Human Rights here in Geneva. If we had to choose 3 words to describe Ai Weiwei's work, we would choose talent, courage, and unrest. Weiwei is an outstanding artist, and he creates art on the way others would go on a boxing ring, with all his forces, all his strength, and with no concession. Weiwei devotes his life to fight oppression and advocate for freedom and justice. Nothing ever stops him, and we are very proud to count him as a dear friend of our festival. 3 years ago, when he directed his first feature film, Human Flow, with our friend Andy Cohen, we had the pleasure and the honor to welcome him here, on this very stage in Geneva, alongside Filippo Grandi. Last January, when the pandemic started, Weiwei immediately decided that a film had to be made. Coronation was shot secretly by friends in Wuhan, and the film is a proof that nothing will ever stop Weiwei to make his films. Neither exile, or a complete lockdown, or China's absolute control of communication. The film had a difficult distribution, but this festival will always be a safe harbor for the work of Ai Weiwei. We are proud to show the film in the selection of the festival. We are very proud to have Ai Weiwei with us tonight here in Geneva, a few meters away from the headquarters of the WHO. Thank you very much, our friend Weiwei, for being with us tonight. The conversation will be moderated by one of France's top journalists, Christine Ockrent. Christine just published a book called The War of Narratives, La guerre des récits, Xi, Trump, Poutine, la pandémie et le choc des empires. Thank you very much, Christine, and have a wonderful conversation.
L'art doit quelquefois prendre la place de la politique, quand la politique, pour des raisons économiques, est bloquée.
It's important to be able to write about violence with the same intimacy with which I write about love.
We created the kind of community that allowed us to give expression to our dignity.
Black lives matter.
African young people.
Actually, I'm not a hero.
Good evening, Ai Weiwei, and thank you so much for being with us live. I believe you're now in London. You spend your time between London and Berlin, assuming you can move around. How do you manage to travel?
Well, now at this moment I'm in Portugal.
Oh, you're in Portugal.
I drive twice from Berlin to Portugal, and of course with my assistant. I don't drive myself, but we did come to Portugal by car. I have a new studio here.
You have a studio in Portugal, but you are such a gifted artist in so many different fields. So what type of work are you devoting yourself to right now? Is it sculpture, architecture?
I devote myself with emptiness. I don't have to do anything, but that gave me the liberty to do everything. So I do as I like, and I'm very privileged to do that.
and we are very privileged again to have you with us tonight. It's been 14 months now that that new coronavirus burst out in your country, in Wuhan. Nobody knows to this day exactly how this pandemic actually crystallized, where it actually came from. But my first question to you, and of course bearing in mind that extraordinary film, Coronation, which is in fact, I think, a unique testimony to what really happened in Wuhan. My first question would be, in the course of these 14 months, what has been the biggest surprise for you when it comes to the way China has handled the pandemic?
Well, at the very beginning, I predicted certain things will be happening, like lacking of transparency, and China always been practice without no transparency, and all the informations are not clear. So this is not from now. It has been like that in past half century. It's a communist society. So the leaders would decide what should be released to the public, or what not to, or when to do it, or everything is decided by the authoritarian leaders. So there's no any kind of restrictions, no independent of investigation or media. So you will never have the possibility to get the so-called truth. And from that understanding, from very beginning, I decided to make a movie, to do a documentary, and to leave something for the world to try to understand, and also for the future.
What is extraordinary in your film is really the contrast between the efficiency of the system, the technology in that hospital, and the total lack of humanity. Doctors are obviously extremely devoted. They hardly speak to each other. And then the real people, so to speak, their emotions are never taken into account. It's a totally inhumane world.
Well, the Chinese leaders have always argued the people's life is the highest standard for human rights. They always argue that way. That means they can sacrifice the humanity and trying to protect so-called society, and also to protect their power. So they always have been doing that, and they have been always doing that, and they did it very well. And China basically, China is like a military compound. Nobody can raise any question.
Would you say that indeed the pandemic has strengthened even more the power of the supreme leader?
The pandemic have given them very strong confidence if they look at what happened in US and Europe. And not only the leaders, but also the people start to believe their society is much better with their system and with this one-party system. And of course, it gave a strong edge to the civilians and to the control.
The way from January 20th onwards, when Xi Jinping understood the scope of the threat over the country and the 1,400,000,000 Chinese, and Wuhan and the province came to a total stop, the narrative that has been built by Beijing through diplomats, through social media, through traditional media, has been a triumphant one, as if to show that indeed the Chinese system is not only the best in the world, but the system that the rest of the world should adopt. In your view, you have now been living in Europe for more than 5 years, I believe. Would you say that that narrative has been convincing? And have you heard in Europe people who are really convinced that it would be better to do things the Chinese way?
Well, it's very different society. China is a society, human rights and individual freedom never being taken in consideration. So it's very different from Europe. And now, yes, they are very successfully controlled this pandemic situation, but it doesn't really prove the system have any advantage over the democratic society. And still, China put all the cost on every individual, on their freedom, on their freedom of their thinking, freedom of to ask questions, and to really give a criticism to any government control. But they did it very professionally, very skillfully. And but it works for China very well. But I don't think it would work for Europe. It's a completely different culture and society.
Have you personally been exposed to more attacks on the social media by Chinese authorities, by Chinese diplomats who seem to have changed their style according to the lone wolf model? Mm-hmm. Have you experienced that yourself?
Yes, everybody, if you pay attention to what happens in China in past years, there's two factors you cannot avoid. One is China have a stronger and stronger voice. That means they do have strong self-estimate. They have great confidence. They become very arrogant, and the second, you can see they start to challenge the West, the democracy and the freedom of Western world, and of course that also can show the West have a lot of deficiency. A lot of things the West cannot really. It's a lot of problem happens in the West. So this kind of narrative and this kind of argument will going for next at least 5-10 years.
In your view, what is the main mistake that we in the West make when we address China? Are we being too naive? Are we being manipulated? Are we being too arrogant and too ignorant in a way about that very ancient culture and the way leadership has always been exercised in the Chinese culture?
With the words you're choosing, I would say ignorance. I think in the West, you don't really understand China, and also you don't understand what is this state capitalism and named as a communist. So I think it's quite naive, I should say, but with the reason of being selfish, short-sighted, and no political vision, no philosophical values, not a real argument, but rather want to take advantage of this used to be a poor nation, but to take great advantage for those poor people, the 1.4 billion people, to become rich. So the West is the biggest beneficiary of the China's race. And until come to a moment, they realize the competition become irresistible, and also it challenges the West in very core values. So probably it's kind of too late. But and also I don't see there's a possibility the West can really stop China to become a major power in the world.
In your view, does the Biden administration in the US, which has already set up China as the main competitor and the main challenger, very much indeed, not the same style, but very much indeed in the same approach as the Trump administration. I believe Tony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, and Jake Sullivan, who is in charge of national security, will meet next Thursday in Alaska, I think, their Chinese counterparts. What do you make of this dialogue, which has to be built between Beijing and Washington on both sides? And it was very clear from the speeches after the General Assembly of the Communist Party in Beijing a few days ago. On both sides, it seems the two hyperpowers are not only willing to have this confrontation, but trying to get ready for it. Would you agree?
I don't think so. I think the American administration still, yes, they have been well aware what is the challenge, but I don't see they can really have a fundamental strategy. They still trying to work with China with this so-called win-win strategy, because all in their mind is how to share the whole, profit of the development. And that would not help US first, because this is a long naiveness or excuse from the Obama administration, continuity of that kind of idea. And but China, I think, will continue to progress because China have a much bigger view about China's position and China's future in the coming decades.
At the same time, China needs American and European markets for its own goods, for its technology, which is making.
Well, yeah, you're right. But China have much more confidence today. In many ways, China is the technology they can still get from different partners. You know, I don't think the U.S. and Europe will always work together. There's so many different interests, and I don't think the world still can be divided as like a Cold War time. You know, so China have a lot of advantage in dealing with different partners.
To get back to the pandemic, there is still a great degree of uncertainty, of mystery about the very origin of the new coronavirus. And here in Geneva, of course, where the World Health Organization and so many other UN organizations have their headquarters, there has been widespread criticism of the way WHO has handled the pandemic from the very start. The fact that the WHO mission was allowed to get to Wuhan almost 1 year after the burst of the pandemic. The fact that, as I understand, foreign experts had to sit in their hotels for 2 weeks, were not allowed to actually get to really have the original scientific data that has been gathered in Wuhan and in other institutes. Is that, in your view, a way deliberate by the leaders in Beijing to humiliate WHO and to actually show the West that they shouldn't, that no Western expert should pretend to fiddle into Chinese affairs?
China has been always very clear. No nation can interfere the so-called their internal affairs. Always very, very clear. And China played a clear role in UN, always voted with this against the US or some European nations. And of course, China would never let so-called European or the World Organization to do the research or to do the investigation. It's not possible. And so the truth of what really happened and at the beginning of the pandemic and how early they already know the pandemic is human to human is very clear. It's at least a month or 2 months earlier, they know it. Don't forget China had a SARS 2003. From that time on, they already had a clear lessons to know what kind of pandemic that they're handling and what kind of damage it can do. So China is very smart, intelligent people. They have this very high quality pandemic, research center in Wuhan. So it's very easy to draw the conclusion. First, China knows much earlier, but it doesn't reveal to anybody. Second, WHO also know the situation and also stand on the side of the China and trying to, at the beginning, trying to say, this is no problem, China can handle it. So this definitely bears a strong responsibility or for this pandemic to spread to such a degree in the world.
Indeed, the Chinese leaders have considered the virus to be a state secret, an internal affair, as you say. But when Xi Jinping spoke to the WHO General Assembly, I think it was in June, if my memory is right, he said that the vaccine had to be a common good. And that was, of course, the promise which many world leaders at the time said should be respected. Now, scientific progress has been remarkable, that there are indeed today many vaccines which are operational in a very, very short span of time. It's extraordinary. But of course, now the vaccines have in turn become a tool of not really soft power, but really diplomacy, power. And the Chinese in particular, I think that now they are offering or selling 2 or 3 different vaccines to some 40 countries in the world. So would you say that the vaccine has become a new tool of power and influence for Beijing?
I think anything can be a new tool for the politics, but we have to remember in the reality, which nation has been benefited or have to, has all those vaccines is US and the UK and Israel. So that clearly tells what is really happens in the world. I do feel happy when China and Russia says this has to be common good and they selling or their vaccines huge percentage to other nations and developed nations. I think that should be done by so-called civilized world, but it's not. It's always American first, always Brexit, and always, benefits those powerful nations. And the world is divided. And of course, it's political. And it's not only political too by China or Russia, but also by US and by Europe.
And of course, to this day, I think there are about 130 countries in the world which have not received one single shot of vaccine. The discrepancy between the rich countries and the poor is not only shocking, but it's a gap which will take some time to fill if, although there are some funds like COVAX and some foundations like the Gates Foundation, which have alerted now for many months that indeed this was a crucial problem, because obviously if the world at large is not taken care of, the virus will continue to circulate. When it comes to art, would you say that people in our part of the world, in our democracies, in our rich democracies, have become so self-absorbed and indeed the fear of the virus has increased that kind of egotism and self-centeredness. Would you say that art no longer plays its role now that museums are closed almost all over Europe, and that indeed artists like yourself, you can't even be with us, somehow art does not help as much as it could?
Well, the art has always been some kind of playful in the culture sense, but never really touches its own core value, and it's never really fight for freedom for society, and it has been very corrupted in general. And this is the truth. And, you know, obviously, under this pandemic, it's become even more harsh.
In your own world, what would be the most helpful move that an artist can perform today in order to help society at large to get through this very enduring and lasting issue?
I think artists should be a morally a fighter, and also aesthetically a fighter. And artists cannot separate itself from a human struggle. And so first to recognize yourself as a human being, and you're no different from any other people. And to really share your emotions and your expression. And seems pretty difficult. And we really see art can speak for the people.
Some of your films, not only Coronation, which is part of our festival here, but also your film about migrants. These are very powerful tools to promote a message, and first of all to show real people and true misery, and you never make any comment. That's one of the remarkable characteristics of your movies. You don't pretend to inflict, so to speak, your own comments. It's all raw. Do you find that this kind of filmmaking is the best way to convey emotions and to convey a kind of reality which otherwise would escape us?
I would say I'm not very confident about my personal view, and I trust the audience. I try to provide the possibility for them to make their own judgment.
You're being very modest.
I am.
Well, who would doubt that? Certainly none of us here. What today in Europe, of course, the migrants issue is there to stay, and in Lesbos, which is one of the places that you devoted time to, and you said that it was really a scandal that indeed, and it goes on, that indeed people would be concentrated in such terrible conditions, with most of us turning away. What is your next documentary? What should it be about?
I always think about, should I always keep doing those documentaries? There's so much tragic thing happening at our time, and there's so much injustice. It's coexist with our safety, sense of safetyness or happiness. So we become hypocrites. We become a person never really truthful, because we cannot bear the responsibility. So it's very strong challenge. Should I still working on those kind of direction? So I always have to ask myself.
There are some very interesting questions coming from our audience. As you know, we're not all together physically, of course, but there are many people listening to you and reacting to what you are telling us. And Laurent would like to know what measures have been taken. He refers to Coronation. What measures have been taken to safeguard the safety of the people who took part in the documentary? Did you have to take special ways?
We have to take special measures, and we are very careful. But it turned out Chinese authority, when they see this film, they highly praise the film. They think this film is very honest film. And in contrast, the Western most popular festivals refuse to show those films, like Venice, like Toronto, like New York Film Festival, like Netflix, like Amazon. They refuse to even show the film. So, the people have been working for me in the hospitals. Many of them are my friends and artists. I would ask them, do they really want to show their true identity? Some of them are still working in the government. They said, no, but you can show the film. But some said, we don't care, we are recording the truth. So I really admire them. And it turned out nobody has been bothered by Chinese authority.
Which I guess shows that the authorities are being very smart about
they're learning. Yes, yeah. I think they're learning. They would not make this kind of fuss. Of course, they would not let my film be shown in China, and they don't let my name to be exposed to the public. But they try not to bother me that much.
That was a question that Catherine wanted to ask you, whether there was any chance that indeed the Chinese public would have be shown your film. Another question by Martin: has the lockdown strategy been used in China? Is it the first time such a strategy was used with indeed great efficiency, or had there been previous examples with SARS in 2002, 2003, or before?
Well, 2008, there's a huge earthquake happened in Sichuan. 70,000 people dead within seconds.
But you went went there. You worked in Sichuan at the time.
I did the investigations about students, the deaths of students. But that time, China also worked with admirable efficiency with the military and controlled the whole earthquake area and managed there's no question to be to asked. And they cannot check on the buildings structure and all those bad corruptions. And they managed to control the media, and everything very quickly become like nothing happened. You know, China is always doing this and is very skillful and very successful.
But you were arrested and sent to prison in 2011.
Yeah.
Was it related to the work you had done in Sichuan?
Yes, because my stubbornness. I did an investigation. We find 5,000 students' name, birthday. You know, we clearly can identify those buildings, so-called the Doufu building. That means construction below the standard regulation. So I gradually got me very involved with confrontations with authority.
What are your relations today in Berlin or in London or maybe now in Portugal? I believe there are some very rich Chinese who have bought what we called in Europe a golden passport so as to enter the Schengen zone. How do they relate to you? Do you have any contact with that very sort of wealthy Chinese migrants?
Seems you know everything from politics to immigration, and I have no relation to anybody. I have relations to cow, to sheep, to birds, to cats. You know, I have a lot of wildlife or you know, nice environment.
Claude would like to know if the Chinese diaspora, especially in the US, may have an impact on Chinese authorities. Or is it rather the other way around, that the Chinese government has an impact on the Chinese diaspora?
What's the diaspora?
The many Chinese communities living in the US or indeed living in other parts of the world.
Okay. Well, this huge population live outside of China, and also each year there's maybe hundreds of thousands of students come out from China. But seems they don't have much influence for change of China. You know, China is under the very firm control of communists.
Another question by Evelyn, which gets us back to the pandemic. If China seems to have contained the epidemic, at what price, and why WHO seems to be complacent? That's a question that gets us back to one of the topics we discussed earlier.
Yeah, I think the price is you have a nation which will continuously under this very authoritarian control. You know, the people would have no trust for this party which puts heavy pressure on its own people, and never really trust. Its own people is, and WHO, I think they should admit the mistakes they did, at least. And also, it's very dangerous to have an organization which is not really insist on scientific and rational decisions, but based on trying to get money from China.
In China, as I understand, a good part, most of very high-level scientific research is actually conducted by the army or under the control of the army itself has many departments devoted to scientific research. Does that explain why the control has been so tight and again so efficient when it comes to, for experts around the world, to try and find out the true origins of the virus?
Well, the whole structure of a Communist Party is like a secret society. Of course, the army is even more.
And so it's also army laboratories that produce the vaccine, for instance.
Many levels. There's a scientific research and also army laboratory. And of course, everything did by army laboratory is a secret.
Do you know what percentage of the Chinese population is now vaccinated? I understand it is not that high because the pandemic has being under control, people would not feel at risk and therefore would not really rush to get the shots. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's very small percentage, as far below or 10 or 5%, because basically it's under control. When there's no disease, they don't need to be vaccinated.
Are you? Did you get the vaccine?
I don't know I ever would get a vaccine. I'm not in China, and also I don't belong to other groups. So,
well, I'm sure that in any European country and in Portugal, for that matter, you are perfectly entitled to to ask for a vaccine.
Well, I applied, but I tell you a truth: the Chinese authorities have personally told me, we come back, we'll give you a vaccine.
But that, I guess, is an invitation that you are not that enthusiastic about.
Since there's no transparency, I try to stay away.
Another question from our audience, Pierre Olivier. After this year of the pandemic situation, what is your vision as an artist about the future of China and the world? That's a very ambitious question.
I cannot predict the so-called future, but I can tell China is going to move ahead and it's going to become a stronger factor in the global politics. And also I can see the US and Europe have a lot of problems, seems very difficult to resolve. So the world still will become very much depends of the Chinese involvement, and also the environment still will be the big issue for the so-called human future.
When it comes to the environment, China is the biggest world consumer of coal and of all other sorts of energy. However, officially, the authorities say that they want to join the climate change treaties and take part in that worldwide effort. Do you think it is window dressing? Is it a way, again, to show what an exemplary country China wants to be? Or is there any hope that there will be efforts from the Chinese authorities to change the patterns of energy consumption?
From my understanding, China, if they promise to do it, they will do it, because that's for their own future and the benefits. And, they already made a great effort in that direction. I think that will benefit them, and also means a new opportunity in leading to this kind of research.
One question from Amy. How can the transparency of the press reports in China be improved? Do you think a free press in the country could have prevented the pandemic?
Certainly, transparency and the freedom of press would enforce the public to be informed, and would push the government to give the pressure to the government. But I don't think that can be improved in China. It's not possible.
What about social media, which are widely used in China, but they are under tight control? To what extent does the regime use the social media also to promote its own messages and influence public opinion in China?
I think the social media is a real war, how do you say, the war zone, weapon. And the government controlled it very well. And they would delete all the information which could have any attitude to criticize them, but also use it as a very strong propaganda. So they used it very skillfully.
In that way, has that huge health crisis in China made the situation much worse when it comes to what we call in our democracies information? In other words, has the control worsened, been much stiffened, hardened through the pandemic?
I would not say it's getting worse, because it's always like that. It's never really getting better. So it maintains the same, very strong control, and there's no possibilities for any freedom.
One question from Lena. We see in your film that China was well prepared. So in your view, for how long did the Chinese authorities know about this virus in order to be so efficient when they actually decided to lock down Wuhan and the whole province?
I think that's a good question. I think the Chinese authority trying to gain the possibility of time, at least 2 months before they announce the lockdown. They know the situation is really pretty bad. And they stopped the doctors talking about the issues. They even have police to questioning them, and all the media all over China said that's a rumor. And that all those evidence clearly to tell China, at least to know a few months ahead of the lockdown.
There have also been efforts by the Chinese authorities to put the blame on the US, saying, for instance, that the virus had actually been imported into China by some US soldiers when they took part in Olympic military games in Wuhan in the fall of 2019. Did that take hold in China? Was that a theory that some Chinese people believed could be true?
Well, some of Chinese population believes it, that's for sure. And of course, they have a lot of rumors. So rumors is really efficient to destroy the truth.
Another rumor, or indeed another set of facts, quote unquote, which Chinese authorities expressed in the very strange press conference of the WHO delegation in Wuhan at the end of their mission. The Chinese experts said that indeed the virus could have been linked to frozen food, imported frozen food, frozen salmon or something like that. In other words, again, a foreign virus and not a Chinese virus. Is that part of the rumors that have been carried around?
I think they purposely use those rumors because they cannot provide early evidence of, samples of early patients, which happened months ago. So when they have an official policy to destroy those samples from a different laboratory, and it tells everything. Of course, they have to replace this kind of with rumors, to fill up the gap.
A question by Timothée. China obviously doesn't want to admit mistakes in the management of the crisis. Besides not wanting to show its weaknesses, do you think it is part of Chinese culture to look forward and never backward, not to look into one's past errors? Is that Chinese or is it just human?
I would say it's a human character, but the Chinese have some confidence on their own way to interpret the so-called truth.
You stressed earlier on in our conversation the fact that we Westerners, we in Europe are so ignorant about China, about Chinese culture. What advice would you give us in order to become less ignorant?
Ignorance is not just about knowledge, but rather about our point of view about the world, our understanding about who we are and how we relate to other part of the world. So I don't think that can be well established in Europe. And, so many things, we are morally quite corrupted. And, we only so trying to get this kind of partial justice, not all justice. So by doing that, we lost our argument and the moral ground. So I don't think that ignorance can be improved.
Is there... Your father was a great poet, celebrated in China, and then sent with you. You were a baby, a very young child. Your father and the whole family, you were sent actually to the Uyghur region for years. And your father was humiliated. He had to clean toilets for years. You helped him doing so. What is the lesson that you still carry with you today from these terrible years in your own country?
I think the lesson is Chinese culture or Chinese communist society is a society which has very deep problem in dealing with humanity, human rights, and freedom of speech. And that seems cannot even to be solved because it's some kind of culture. And that's how I feel.
You mean it's a culture where indeed authority is not to be questioned, and any human beings are not equals. They cannot pretend to their own freedom.
I think many Chinese wisdom is about that. It's about you cannot question the authority, and you're not at that position. You cannot questioning that, and so there's no such thing called individual freedom. No, it's always about a collective well-being, but not individual freedom.
But you are Chinese, and you are the absolute reverse of that sort of Chinese ideal. You embody freedom in what you say, in what you do, in all the various forms of art where you express yourself?
Well, two things. Maybe one thing, my father is a poet. He studied in Paris in 1930s. So he has this kind of soul of being very liberated literature man. And the second, I have problem with authoritarian. I truly believe they're inhuman. And, all I do is against authoritarian in any form, so.
I believe you have a son who is 11 or 12. What is...
you know everything.
Oh, no, not enough, not
you
enough.
You know everything. So funny.
Tell us.
He's 12.
He's 12. And if you try and think of him in 10 years' time, what would you like him to have become? What would you like him to be as a young man?
I liked him to have a sense of justice and also have a sense of human dignity. And, I think those are most important for anybody to have.
Well, Ai Weiwei, I think that's a wonderful conclusion to this conversation. We're all extremely grateful, not only for your time, but for your generosity
and also your truthfulness, your candidness, and your courage. And so we are very much looking forward to having you with us, I hope, not only in a virtual way, but in the real life, the way life used to be. And from all of us here in Geneva, we wish you well, and we are very much looking forward to your next film, or your next sculpture, or your next building, or your next Lego, or whatever you do. Thank you so much again.
It's such a pleasure to talking to you. I really feel very privileged to talk to someone so profound and have such a clear knowledge about who I am. And I'm also very happy to be part of this festival. I think you're doing very important work. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.